A scary story about a haunted forest. In a small town surrounded by greenery, people whispered about the forgotten forest of the lost souls. It was named for the chilling stories and mysterious disappearances of people. Legends spoke of spirits wandering between the trees, filled with resentment and sorrow, who snatched the living into their embrace. But for 5 friends, Emily, Jake, Katie, Sam, and Liam, these were merely campfire tales. One day, filled with enthusiasm, the friends decided to spend the weekend in this cursed forest, confident that laughter and friendship were enough to scare away any fears. They packed their tents, food, and excitement, ignoring the warnings of the local townspeople, and jumped into their cars, heading towards the forest. The first hours of their adventure were filled with giggles and jokes, but as they ventured deeper into the woods, the ticking clock began to leave its mark in the form of rising tension. The trees seemed to close in around them, like clever hunters awaiting their prey. When they set up camp by a cliff, silence enveloped them, intertwining with the calls of distant birds. The sunset painted the sky in crimson and amber hues, but common sense gradually began to fade from the heroes' minds. Soon after lighting the campfire and sharing stories, a laugh pierced through the leaves, sweet, yet tinged with despair. Emily froze, paying attention to the flickering shadows, but the others only laughed, assuring her it was all just a figment of her imagination. Then, the conversation turned to the horrors of the forest, and Liam suddenly grew pale, reminding them of the stories of the vengeful spirits. His voice trembled with fear as he stared into the darkness. "You know, they say a group of young people once disappeared here. The forest spirits took them," he said, and his words hung in the air like fog. A cold breeze swept past them, bringing with it ominous forebodings. As night draped its insatiable mantle over the woods, the hollow rustling sounds around the campfire became unbearable. Leaves hissed, as if forewarning misfortune, while the wind whispered incomprehensible words. Everything around them felt alive, and every snap of a twig sounded like a warning. Their hearts raced in sync with the messages of fear, yet the friends tried to remain brave, seasoning their words with humor. But suddenly, from the low shadows, a figure approached, slender, translucent, and barely discernible. They all stared at it in horror as the figure seemed to seek help. The spirit's face was twisted with sorrow, and its limbs swayed as if they were drowning. In that moment, their friendly confidence shattered like a feather in a raging hurricane. Katie, breaking into a scream as if tearing free from her cocoon of laughter and courage, bolted backward. They all followed suit, desperate to avoid a meeting with the otherworldly. They tried to escape, but it was as if the forest had defied the laws of physics, twisting their paths in confusion. Out of nowhere, cliffs and dark roads appeared, leading into infinity. They ran, but the forest seemed to mock their frantic attempts to flee. Soon, a haze of confusion enveloped them. The wind continued to blow, but the air filled with horror and the stench of decay. The silences were foreign to the living. This was their parallel reality. Every rustle of the forest reminded them that they were not alone. They were pursued by the tears of restless souls, invisibly waiting for the moment to break free. Pairs of friends grew weaker. Fear enveloped them like a heavy fog. After long, torturous minutes, only Emily and Sam remained together, their hearts pounding like the fire in the optimistic campfire. They understood that if they stayed here, they would meet the same fate as their friends. They ran, trembling, in a chaotic panic through the darkened gaps. Unable to look back, they dashed between the trees, their flight an expression of unknown sorrow. Suddenly, a wall of light broke through the trees, as if the heart of the forest had found dreams of salvation. The friends rushed toward the light, hope flickering in their final moments. They knew that within that light, almost all suffering would fade. But when they burst out, the forest stood lifeless and immense. The surroundings froze, as if time had decided to pause, absorbing their fear and pain. The campfire had been extinguished, tents ripped apart, and silence engulfed them like a shell. As the heavy darkness lifted, The friends realized that the forest was not just a place. It had become a pulsating entity, possessed by an eternal desire to erase their essence from the face of the earth. They would have forever remained lost souls if it weren't for their fighting spirit. Hand in hand, they stepped into the reflection of light, leaving behind the forest of the lost souls, but it would forever remain in their hearts. Since then, upon returning to town, they became carriers of grim wisdom, warning others against jesting about spirits. Their eyes now reflected sorrow and fear, understanding that every forest, like every story, holds its own darkness. And although they survived, the sentinels of the forest continued to slowly circle them, waiting for the next victim. Yet now they knew. The forest was not only a realm of the dead, but also a place where the ghosts of their own fears danced. Every evening, as the moon rose above the horizon, they approached the forest with trepidation and respect. Their hearts were forever bound to the dark historical pages of this forest, and they could only pray that the specters of the lost souls would not find them. Scary Story 2: Shadows of Forgotten Souls. When Erica decided to spend the weekend away from civilization, she had no idea that her peaceful hike in the woods would turn into a nightmare. This forest, known for its vastness and mysterious legends, had no right to hide its dark secrets. From the first steps, Erica noticed that the forest had become too silent. The birds' songs had ceased, and even the wind, which usually rustled the leaves, had vanished. When she stumbled upon an abandoned path, overgrown with thorny bushes, her curiosity overcame her fear. She turned onto the path, hoping to discover a wondrous mushroom sanctuary. The deeper Erica wandered into the woods, the stranger her feelings became. Suddenly, it seemed to her that someone was watching her. She stopped and listened. The rustles became louder, and the shadows on the ground seemed to come alive. Hidden behind tree trunks, eyes stared at her, and with them grew a sense of hopelessness. Not far from her stood an old cabin. Its roof was covered in moss, and the door was askew. It looked like it had been abandoned for years. But something drew Erica in. Inside, a heavy silence reigned, the only sound being the creak of the floorboards revealing her presence. Dusty photographs hung on the walls, and the eyes of the people in the pictures seemed to follow her. One man in the corner, with deep dark eyes, looked familiar. Where had she seen him before? Suddenly, a crack sounded from around the corner, and Erica's heart raced. She bolted from the cabin, but the clearing didn't look the same as it had before. The plants seemed to close in around her, creating a sense of confinement. Erica turned sharply, and in the distance, she spotted a figure, a mysterious silhouette reminiscent of the man from the photographs. His long shadow danced on the ground, his face remaining shrouded in darkness. She ran, but with each movement, the forest seemed to laugh. As she fled, the rustles intensified. Leaves were torn to shreds, and branches reached for her hands, pulling her back as if trying to drag her home. In sheer panic, she tried to find an exit, but the forest appeared to be alive. The walls of trees leaned in, forming a terrifying maze. Finally, Erica burst into an open space and saw a bonfire. Around it sat people with scarred faces, their eyes burning with hatred. "Erica, how long you have walked to us," said one with a voice reminiscent of the whispers of the dead. These beings were ghosts, each one a victim of the forest, but they had changed. Their faces twisted into perpetual smiles, and the innocence of childhood slipped away, replaced by dark energy. She turned to run, but it was too late. The ghosts surrounded her, their hands reaching out toward her. "Become part of us," they whispered, drowning her in their nightmares. Fear filled her soul as she felt cold hands tighten around her neck, and memories of her life began to flow into their darkened minds. Touching the ground, she saw the shadows begin to part. One of the ghosts, the same man, leaned close and quietly said, "I have been waiting for you. Now you are home." Her consciousness was engulfed by darkness and despair, and Erica realized that the forest would never let her go. As the last scream faded in all the woods, an invisible connection emerged, raising using their stories, their souls, to attract new victims. In that moment, when the final cry silenced, the forest fell quiet again, awaiting the next traveler. Scary Story 3. Or the mystery of the wild woods. Deep in the cedarwood forest, where light barely penetrates through the dense foliage, there was an abandoned camp that had long become the subject of urban legends. It was said that anyone who dared to spend the night in this forest was doomed to confront horrors they couldn't even imagine in their dreams. Locals whispered about a creature that guarded its lands, searching for unwelcome guests. On this eerie night, our main characters, 4 friends, Dylan, Tammy, Jake, and Laura, filled with an adventurous spirit, decided to spend the weekend in this sinister place. They took with them a tent, flashlights, and of course, a bag of snacks. When they arrived at Cedarwood, the forest appeared silent and terrifying. The birds did not sing, and the wind did not whisper. After setting up their tent and lighting the fire, the friends began to change topics in their conversation. It seemed that the forest was immersed in a heavy silence when Tammy began telling scary stories she once heard from her grandfather. People have disappeared in this forest. They say they saw something terrible. This creature calls itself the Guardian of the Woods. If you decide to stay here longer than a night, it will find you, she said with a strange conviction. As night fell, each of the friends felt a chill that penetrated deep into their bones. Their talks about fears shifted into an unsettling presence. They made bets on who could spend the night in a camping chair under the open sky. But as the fire crackled, the forest began to whisper. In that moment, Laura, who began playing a tune on her guitar, struck a nerve in their spirits. The moment her voice faded, strange sounds echoed from the dark edges of the forest, crunching branches, mysterious rustles. The friends quickly froze, feeling cold fingers of fear gripping their hearts. Suddenly, at night, they woke to the horrifying whispering outside the camp. "Help me!" This hoarse, almost indecipherable plea sounded as if the wind were singing in a chorus of frozen souls. In a panic, the friends grabbed their flashlights. Despite their fear, they stepped outside, peering into the dark forest, and saw that the tent where they had just been was overturned, and their belongings were scattered. Laura felt strangely drawn, taking a step toward the retreating shadow. But Jake grabbed her hand. "Don't go there, there's something," he exclaimed, squinting into the darkness. At that moment, shapes emerged from the shadows, eerie and unnatural, with long, tentacle-like limbs and sharp teeth glistening in the dark. They looked like twisted trees given life. The friends began to flee, but the forest became increasingly confusing with every step, as if the trees were laughing and shifting their positions. They ran without direction, hearing laughter and noise behind them. Suddenly, Laura spotted a strange light in the distance. Was it their way out? Or merely an illusion conjured by the forest? Encouraged by hope, they bolted toward the light. As they moved, a figure crawled toward them on the ground. It was one of the teens who had disappeared here years ago. His eyes shone in the night, but his face was twisted in horror. "Don't go there! They will take you!" he screamed before vanishing in an instant. The friends felt their hearts almost stop when they realized it was not just a legend but a bitter reality. When they found themselves in a clearing, they noticed something gleaming under an ancient oak tree. It was a collection of photographs of the missing teens, and they looked horrifying. Their eyes were filled with fear and despair. None of them could approach, as if an unseen force compressed their hearts. "We have to get out!" cried Dylan, glancing fearfully into the dark expanses of the forest. Their hopes were fading.